fellow Falcoholics. Welcome to another episode of the Falcoholic Live. I'm your host, Kevin Knight, at Falcoholic Kevin on Twitter, here to bring you part 2 of our Falcons Free Agency 2021 series. We're going to be taking a look today at some priority re-signings for the Falcons. If you missed part 1, I encourage you to go check that out. In part 1, we broke down the basics of free agency, the different types of free agents, so the unrestricted free agents or UFAs, RFAs, the restricted free agents, and ERFAs, the exclusive rights free agents. So if you're not familiar with how those different types of free agents work, I encourage you to go check that video out. It'll be up on the channel as well. As I said, today we're going to be looking at specifically Falcons free agents that the team should consider re-signing. These are my priority type players. Obviously, with a new regime coming in, we don't know exactly what types of people the Falcons will be prioritizing, if the scheme change is going to lead to these guys kind of being on the outside looking in, or if new head coach Arthur Smith or GM Terry Fontenot has players from previous teams or stops that they would rather have instead. So this is just guesswork, but these are the players that I would prioritize. Before we get to that, I do want to give you a quick note on an important free agency rule that I didn't touch on last time, and that is the top 51 rule. So just to make that clear, the top 51 rule kicks into effect on the first day of the league year, and it lasts until final cuts at the end of training camp. And what the top 51 rule means is that only the top 51 most expensive contracts will actually count against the salary cap until the end of training camp. This is to allow those big 90-man rosters that the team will carry into OTAs and into minicamp and into the preseason and so on. That's to make sure that those extra players don't put extra strain on the cap, because that wouldn't be fair for a cap that's designed to be balanced around 53 players. For a team to have to all of a sudden accommodate 90 doesn't make a lot of sense. What this also will do, and could be very meaningful for a team like the Falcons, who is very tight to the cap going into 2021, is that it will cut off 2 of the top 53 contracts. So that doesn't sound like a lot, but those 2 contracts, generally they'll be around that 600 to 700,000 mark a piece. So in effect, this could net the Falcons around $1.5 million in cap space temporarily, basically until the end of training camp. So in a year where they have very, very little flexibility, that little amount of cap space could be the difference between them signing or not signing someone, or having enough to sign draft picks or whatever. So that's important to keep in mind. One other thing real quick is that the NFL did institute a rule last year to help veterans make rosters. So basically what this rule does in effect is if you pay a vested NFL veteran, a minimum contract for whatever their years of accrued seasons are, the league will actually reduce that cap hit down to be competitive with the cheaper rookie deals and UDFA deals, because too many teams were basically prioritizing the cheaper contracts to save money and refused to sign veterans. So the league instituted this to help some of these journeyman veterans find teams. So in 2020, this ended up reducing the cap hit for a lot of vet minimum contracts down to around $750,000. Keep in mind, if there's any sort of bonuses added to these contracts, it doesn't reduce those. So if they pay a veteran, $1 million is their vet minimum deal, and then they add a $200,000 bonus, it might drop down to $250,000 or to $750,000 in terms of the cap hit for the base salary, but that $200,000 bonus will still be tacked on, so that will go up more. So that's important to note. So now with those quick rules out of the way, let's take a look at some of the unrestricted free agents that I would prioritize re-signing for the Falcons. So with the knowledge that the Falcons are probably not going to have very much, if any, cap space available to sign free agents, I'm going to really shy away from some of the more expensive names on this list. Alex Mack obviously is the biggest free agent name. It's generally expected that he plans to retire, but if he doesn't plan to retire, I don't think the Falcons are going to have the sort of money available to re-sign him. Keanu Neal is another one that I'm going to bring up at the end as a possible re-signing, but I'm not sure how good of a fit he is in Dean Pees' scheme, and he's also going to have a lot of suitors. We have Dan Quinn as a defensive coordinator, we have Raheem Morris as defensive coordinator, and we have Jeff Ulbrich as a defensive coordinator, and I'd have to think all 3 of those guys are going to be trying to get Keanu Neal into their respective buildings buildings. So the Falcons may not want to be interested in that sort of bidding war there. Todd Gurley also we're not going to talk about because he's not coming back to Atlanta for any amount of money, I would think. But in terms of guys I would like to resign, I'm going to start with a few corners. The first one would be Darqueze Dennard. He was a free agent addition last year, ended up coming extremely cheap. His market was very limited for some unknown reason. And the reason I would prioritize Dennard is because he will be very inexpensive due to the injuries he sustained in 2020. I expect he'll be able to come to Atlanta for around $1 million, around that veteran minimum number. But also when he was healthy, he played like a solid starter. Dennard is more of a slot specialist, but he actually played on the outside after the team moved Isaiah Oliver into the slot and was fine there as well. This is not a high-end guy, but for a Falcons team that really needs depth at corner and needs versatile guys for Dean Pease defense, I think Dennard makes a lot of sense. In that same vein, cornerback Bleedy Ray Wilson, hashtag free Bleedy. You guys know I'm a big fan of Bleedy Ray. I think he's way better than the previous coaching staff gave him credit for. And by way better, I mean he's a solid starter and probably should have been starting over guys like Kendall Sheffield and Isaiah Oliver for most of the previous seasons. But I think Bleedy makes a lot of sense to bring back for basically the same reasons that Dennard does. He should be cheap, around $1 million, $1.2 million. And he played at a solid starting level. He has every year he's been in Atlanta. He's versatile and provides depth to both the slot and the outside. So I like Bleedy Ray Wilson. I would like to see him back, and I think he's a cheap signing that makes a lot of sense for this team. The next one, it might surprise some people, is center guard Justin McCray, and it's not just because he's former UCF player. I do think that the Falcons will need trustworthy veteran depth on the interior with Alex Mack leaving the team or retiring. He's going to be very cheap, around $1 million, and we know he can play both center and guard. When he had to step in a few games for injuries, he was solid. He played at a solid starting level, nothing special, but that sort of reliable veteran depth is important, particularly when you don't really have anyone else at center behind Matt Hennessy. So I think bringing back McCray to be depth, not to be a starter at left guard or anything like that, but to be depth, I think that makes a lot of sense. There's also a lot of names to just consider. I don't think these are priority re-signings, but depending on what the front office decides to do, these are the names that I would consider bringing back that aren't necessarily priorities. So we talked about Keanu Neal. I don't think it's going to happen because of his price tag, but if Dean Pease decides he's a good scheme fit, I wouldn't be excited. I wouldn't be upset to see him come back. I think he's a good player and I enjoy watching him. Depending on what they do at edge with cuts, Steven Means or Charles Harris are both guys that could come back very cheap, near the vet minimum. Both offer some flexibility on the inside-outside. They could play a stand-up role as well. Both are solid depth guys. And if they do cut Alan Bailey and Dante Fowler, they're not going to have any edge players under contract whatsoever, so they're going to need somebody. And these guys are both quality depth players, not really going to make any huge plays for you, but they're going to play the run, and they're going to be able to get some pressure when they're in there. So as like third and fourth edge players on a team in desperate need of edge help, not the worst players you could get. Some other names I'll just list off quickly. Some safeties, DeMonte KZ, Sherrod Niesman. Both of those guys could potentially help with the safety depth. It really just depends for KZ on his injury and if he has other suitors. And for Niesman, I think he's a solid starter. So I wouldn't be upset to see him return on a minimum deal either. Linebacker Edmund Robinson was good on special teams. I think he's actually a better fit in a 3-4. I think he can play some edge defender. He's a big linebacker who has some flexibility to go down to the line of scrimmage. And wide receiver Laquan Treadwell came on towards the end of the year. Solid red zone target. He'll be cheap as well. So I wouldn't be upset if they were looking to just kind of add some cheap depth there and brought back Treadwell. I think he made some plays, and Arthur Smith tended to like bigger wide receivers in Tennessee. Laquan Treadwell fits that bill. The Falcons don't have a lot of size. That could be an option. So those are the unrestricted free agents. Now we're going to take a look at the restricted free agents and exclusive rights free agents that the Falcons should consider tendering and or offering in 2021. So we'll start with the restricted free agents. There's one name here. We touched on it in the last episode, but just to make it clear, that name is Matt Gono, the offensive tackle. He was a very capable swing tackle in 2020, looked good in 2019 as well. I think it would be smart to bring him back to reprise that role in 2021, assuming they have the cap space to do the tender. I expect that it will be a second round tender for Gono if they're worried about another team poaching him. That will probably cost them around $3.25 million, depending on what the cap does. But that tender will basically guarantee no teams are going to try to sign him away, and I think that's a pretty reasonable salary for a good swing tackle. So I would definitely tender Matt Gono at the second round level if I had the money to do so. The only other RFA is Brandon Powell, and I'm not interested, so we can just move past that one. In terms of the exclusive rights free agents to offer for the Falcons, I would definitely offer Younghoe Koo. That's a no-brainer. Koo was awesome in 2020, and I don't think there's any reason to suspect that he wouldn't play well this year. And even if you thought he might fall off, he's only going to be making about $700,000, which is extremely cheap for a league-leading kicker. So enjoy it while it lasts, Falcons, and get him back in here on that 1-year vet minimum deal. Another guy that's an obvious choice is edge Jacob Tuati-Mariner. We also discussed him on the last show. One of the only bright spots on the defensive line this year. Capable guy, has inside-outside flexibility, could potentially drop in and play some 3-4 defensive end, can stand up and rush as well. I think he's a no-brainer. For the same reason they might consider bringing back guys like Steven Means or Charles Harris, except that Tuati-Mariner will actually be cheaper and will probably be better too. So that's a no-brainer to me. The third one that I would strongly consider is tight end Jaden Graham. Didn't really get a lot of play time this year, but we know that Arthur Smith likes to throw to the tight end if he has good ones. I think Jaden Graham still has some upside as a receiver, as a blocker. You know, the jury's kind of still out there, but he'll be extremely cheap. I don't think there's any harm in bringing him back on that 1-year minimum deal to let him compete in camp and see if he can make a name for himself in Arthur Smith's offense. But those are really the guys that I would consider. There's a few other UDFA types that the Falcons could consider, but I don't really think that they're worth discussing. And maybe they come back, maybe they don't, maybe they go catch on with Dan Quinn or someone else elsewhere. But these are the priority guys for the Falcons heading into 2021. So there you have it, folks. Those are my priority re-signings for the Falcons heading into 2021. To give you an idea of, even with these minimal signings, it's going to cost the team to make these signings about $8.5 million, give or take. Some of that will probably be taken off by the top 51 rule, particularly those ERFA contracts for Koo, Tuati-Mariner, and Jaden Graham, but they still have to find, 53 players, to get to that rule. Right now they're only at 42, even considering those 11 reserve future contracts they got. So they're gonna have to come up with $8.5 million probably just to get these folks under contract. The big one obviously being Matt Gono, and if the cap really does go down like some are predicting, he might be someone that you have to go out and just put an original round tender on or something like that, and hope for the best. But those are the ones I would start with, and we can hope that the cap doesn't drop to this nightmare level, because that will give the Falcons a lot more flexibility than they have now. But otherwise, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. We will be taking this Wednesday off for vacation purposes, so thank you for everyone for tuning in to this episode. Next time will be Friday, where we'll be getting into NFL free agents, and we'll be starting with the running backs available, because I know everyone has lots of questions about who is going to be the featured back in Arthur Smith's offense. We can't get Derrick Henry. We don't need Derrick Henry, but there are some intriguing free agent running backs out there that we're going to talk about. And then we'll continue on this series going through some of the most important positions for the Falcons to see if there's any cheap free agents that the Falcons could consider bringing in. Obviously, this all depends on how much money the team can create and how much the salary cap goes down, or if it goes down at all. These are very important details we don't know, so we're just going to do our very best to find out. But again, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. That helps other folks find the channel and the show on YouTube. It helps us grow. We really do appreciate that support. If you're interested in supporting the show financially, you can check us out on Patreon. The link is patreon.com/Falcoholic Get access to some exclusive perks and also get our eternal gratitude. So thank you. Also check out our community Discord server, the link to which is in the show description. And check us out in terms of our other live shows. We usually do a show, like I said, on Wednesday at 8:10 p.m. Eastern. So if you're interested in live shows, we answer viewer questions and all that good stuff. That's on Wednesdays at 8:10 p.m., guys. But otherwise, I am Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin on Twitter. Thank you again for tuning in, and we will see you next time on the Falcoholic Live. Thank you.